Okay, good afternoon, traders. Good afternoon, and welcome to FX Trader Paul Monday Market Update number 206 for Monday, 1st of December 2025. I hope you're all well. Hope you enjoyed the weekend. Hope you're ready for a an interesting and eventful week in markets ahead. If you're joining us in the Zoom call or in the on the YouTube live stream, etc., it'd be good to know that you can hear my voice and you can see the slides. Just make sure the technology is working for everybody. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Monday Market Update, it's just that. It is me flying through as much as I can squeeze in the next 30 minutes or so, looking at strength and weakness within FX markets, looking at a few charts of interest, and there's a good few to have a look at today, and then a look at live markets to see what is saying up at the start of the week. It is not a signal service. It's not trade recommendations. It's just me sharing what I'm looking at and what might be of relevance or of interest to yourself in your own analysis and trading. As always, you are very welcome here, but just remember that you are always responsible for your own trading decisions. And if you want some more education this afternoon, I will be running the Active Trades Monday Market Matters webinar at 2 o'clock London time. Today's educational piece will focus on how to trade the US dollar. You're very welcome to join. You can either register on their website or that QR code will take you there. And for those of you looking for mentorship in 2026, there'll be 5 places available with myself for next year. If you want more details, you can see the QR code there, or drop me a note if you wish to learn more. Okay, let's dig into the main element. Okay, so if you're new to trading or new to joining us, this might maybe look a little overwhelming, might not be able to make sense of it, but it's not that difficult to understand once we explain it, and it's clips out of my own weekend model that I work on the STAM, where I'm looking to identify where's the strength and where's the weakness within FX indices and commodities markets. So what is this telling us, and how can we utilize it in our own trading? Well, here we are. We are into week 49 of the year. Where's the strength and where's the weakness? Has there been any major changes? Well, actually, interestingly, we have had a pump to the top by the Aussie dollar, which we'll maybe look at a little bit later. You know, it has been kind of walling around the sort of top end of the STAM for the last month or so, but we had a little bit of a pump there. I'd be intrigued to see whether that continues based upon some of the Chinese data this morning. We also find that euro remains kind of in second place in terms of strength, and has been there for a good while. Once again, how long that will hold up will undoubtedly have a lot to do with US dollar. Okay, US dollar having sort of got back up to that 100 level on Dixie, had a or sort of a sell off there last week, as kind of, let's say, increasing confidence in another interest rate cut by the Fed later this month, and also possibly up to 3 next year as well. And that kind of takes the wind out of the sails of some of that dollar strength we've seen, and invariably euro will benefit from that. What we've seen is, of course, Swiss franc has rolled over. I've been saying for the last couple of weeks on our sessions, just watch the Swiss franc dailies, and we can see that has rolled over. Sterling's in fifth. Okay, there's plenty we could talk about there in terms of the not only the budget, but how markets reacted to the budget, how the media have reacted, and actually how the people have reacted to the unfolding saga about how the Chancellor Exchequer misled the House, misled markets, misled the people. Okay, and whether that will rumble on this week, I think we'll all be interested to see. Japanese yen, okay, remains at the bottom of the pile, but we're going to maybe look at that later. But that is, as we can see, in terms of this week where we've started, yen has started as strong, and that's a lot of that is to do with Mr. Ueda, the governor of the Bank of Japan, increasingly talking about the kind of likelihood of raising interest rates of the Japanese yen later on at this month at their at their Bank of Japan policy meeting. So, of course, invariably, if we're going to start seeing, for example, dollar and sterling, they're cutting interest rates at the time that Japanese yen, they are raising interest rates. You might want to take that on board in terms of looking at actually how that impacts those particular pairs, and we will look at that a bit more in the moment. Certainly, when I'm looking at sterling, because that's always my first focus, that's very mixed when I look at the individual currencies there. Okay, we have been in buying environments for basically Japanese yen. Okay, we've also now come into one in Swiss franc, and as I said, some of that is to do with that overall Swiss franc weakness more so than any indication of sterling strength. In terms of looking at the indices, commodities, there's still a lot of bearish momentum, okay, although we have kind of come out of the tactical selling environment that we were last week. A lot of that is to do with the kind of sort of the recovery that we saw in some price action at the end of last week, regardless of some of the other shenanigans that went on with regards to sort of events at the CME, etc., which we'll touch on a little bit later. But DAX still remains a tactical short. ASX still remains a tactical short. The VIX, okay, the VIX has flipped from being very bearish, okay, to bullish, which we might look at in a moment. Bitcoin, okay, remains a strategic buy, even though it had a little bit of a bump, which I suspect was more based on dollar weakness than anything else. Others might differ, and that's fine. We have continued that kind of sell-off this morning so far. Okay, we'll have a look at those charts at the moment. So it's going to be an interesting week. Okay, there's a fair bit of data going to be coming out. We'll be getting data, okay, all throughout the week for both the for US, okay, this afternoon. There's also a bit of low-level sterling news, okay, that'll be coming out that I'll be keeping an eye on. Also, I believe the main guys at the OBR are they're at a parliamentary select committee tomorrow. I think that might make interesting viewing, okay, based upon what we've seen over the last couple of days with regards to the difference between the OBR's analysis and the Chancellor's memory of events, shall we say. So that might add a little bit of volatility, a bit of spice, certainly into those of us trading on sterling. Okay, let's have a look at some charts of interest. These are always just normally weekly charts that that are of interest. Okay, whether because they're either setting up or whether there's something we can learn from it, or whether it just helps give us a bit of a understanding of a context around about what's actually occurring. What we've seen here is silver. Now we looked at silver. This is silver on the weekly chart. We looked at it a couple of weeks ago when there was the likelihood, or looking at, was there a double top forming there, okay, at the $50 price. There was a similar kind of price action on gold, and people were looking at, and we discussed, was this the kind of this top of this fantastic trend? Well, you can see for yourself, ladies and gentlemen, that is not the case. Silver in the last sort of week or so has been on an absolute tear, and we might look at that on the kind of lower time frames later. That has kind of also sort of been, let's say, given rise to conspiracy theorist comments because of what happened at the CME. Okay, so CME had elements of both major margin increases across sort of several futures contracts, but also it was closed in particular. They said they had a technical outage at the end of last week, okay, and that had an impact on futures contracts, and naturally that has a knock-on impact across other markets and asset classes, based upon the way the sort of intermarket analysis and relationships between asset classes these days. But it kind of had a lot of people interested in silver for various reasons. But the long and the short of it is that is in a parabolic move higher. Okay, now you can talk lots about, as I said, the conspiracy theorists are talking about how major banks, institutions, families, etc., have been suppressing the price of silver for decades, you might say, and we are breaking out of that. But as I say to all kind of new traders, is that when a market is in a strong trend, don't try and fight it. All right, don't try and fight it. Find it. Is there a way to ride it? And certainly that continues to absolutely power its way higher. And I'll be interested to see how we work towards the sort of the last couple of weeks of 2025 on that. Next one, Netflix, of course. So Netflix went through a stock split, okay, recently, and it kind of had an impact. But once again, this is the weekly chart, and we have talked about this before, in that it has been in a lovely trend for the last couple of years. We start to go parabolic, pulling away from those moving averages, and then invariably, what I was interested in is that we've come away from there, but we have formed basically a lower high, kind of like a 1, 2, 3 pattern there, and we have started to roll over, and the selling has increased, and so from being up here at about 130, just north of $130, and we are now, what of interest to me is that kind of last week, we are creating lower highs, and we're getting beneath the 50. All right, getting beneath that weekly 50, which, as you can see, all right, has been a good time. It's been almost like 2 years since we were last beneath there, and even then, it was a bounce before a lovely move up there, a really nice bounce off the 50. So, I start to get interested when price gets at these kind of inflection points. As always, those of you who've been here before. And so I start to get intrigued, right? Okay, we're behind. Do we pump up here into that kind of 20 and 50 period moving average area? Does that then form as another kind of lower high, which basically then gets us pushing down towards that big round number at 100? Okay, that's the kind of scenario I like to sort of see play out. But we looked at this with Bitcoin a couple of weeks ago, and it didn't pull back; it just collapsed. Okay, so that is, of course, always the interest. Now, Netflix, my understanding, and I don't in any way consider myself a media expert. Netflix are invariably they are entangled in an element in terms of acquisitions of, I think, is it Warner Brothers. If you're a media interest, you might have more insight than me. What I do know about Netflix is that they are releasing. They have started the release of the kind of last series of Stranger Things. This is what happens when you have a kind of a 14-year-old niece who basically insists on keeping you updated with every sort of minutia of the TV show. I don't have to watch it myself. I've got a niece to tell me all about it. But that has been a huge money spinner for Netflix. I think they've made about $1 billion off it, and of course now they're talking about, well, do they try and turn it into a sort of Star Wars type ecosystem there again? So whether that will bail them out, who knows? But certainly at the moment, that doesn't look very bullish to me. And certainly $100 there is where I'd be looking for a drift towards, whether it's an immediate move or, as I said, maybe a pullback into the averages back to about 112 before it rolls over. And then I'm interested in what happens when we get to that big round number. Okay, that's the way I look at that on Netflix at the moment. Airbus, okay, Airbus. So weekly chart of Airbus. Now, like many of them, those kind of aerospace and defense companies, they had done pretty well. Okay, off the back of the challenges in Ukraine, shall we say? But what we have seen, and I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, was that we saw some defense companies starting to basically really come off their frothy peaks that we had seen as conversation around about a peace deal for Ukraine starts to gain a bit of traction now. I said last week that, of course, Mr. Trump wanted to be able to announce it for Thanksgiving, and that didn't occur. But nonetheless, its conversations are still ongoing, and we will see what actually occurs there. So there is that taking the wind out of the sails, but also for Airbus, they have had their challenges. Okay, in particular, they had to sort of kind of recall, I think it's about 600 A320 Airbus engines, because they found that they had issues with the software, issues with solar radiation. That's the world we live in these days. And very whilst they have completed most of that software update, you can see how that has impacted the share price at the start of this week. I think it's like down 10%. All right, it's been down 10% to today. Okay, so once again, I start to look at, all right, well, we after the Trump tariff tantrums earlier in the year, we did move back strongly, of course, as people were worried about what was going on in Ukraine and elsewhere. But that has now drifted us. We've fallen much lower. Uh, what I'll be looking for as well, does the 20 period moving average, does it now flip from where it was here, it was support? Does it flip to resistance? Okay, and then we move back down towards the 50, which might be around about that 180 level. That's the scenario I'd be looking at there at the moment, especially if, as I said, if we get some sort of peace deal by the end of the year with Ukraine, and that's what I'd be having a view on with regards to Airbus. And just to sort of confirm what we just looked at with Airbus, this is Rheinmetall. Okay, it's been keeping the DAX on the one of the stocks keeping the DAX pumped up. Okay, Rheinmetall. You can see that has been a fantastic trend there over the last couple of years, which has accelerated Rheinmetall. They make basically artillery shells, all right, and of course they've not been able to make them fast enough since 2022 with regards to shipping artillery shells to not only to Ukraine but to other countries who are looking to improve their defenses. But as I said, we got as close. We tickled the soft underbelly of €2,000 on Rheinmetall. But we came away from it pretty quickly, and what we have had last week so is we came back to the 50 period moving average, which we have not been really beneath for as I said, over about 2 years, and then even then we kind of V-shaped bump off it. I look and see we're beneath 1,500. We've lost 25% there, okay, over the last few weeks. And so I look at here, okay, this to me is a bit of an inflection point. Does an event occur that basically puts the wind back in the sails of European defence companies and pump us back up towards 1,700? Or do we get that peace deal and then we start to look at, well, hang on a minute, are we sort of drifting back towards these gaps here, okay, around about sort of 1,100 to €1,000, okay? So to me, this is at an inflection point, and watching the news over the next couple of weeks might give us a bit of a hint of where this might particularly go. Okay, so you might, as I said, you might want to add this to your watch list as a chart of interest, and it just gives you an indication of how much those defense stocks have come off over the last couple of weeks. And here is I thought I'd put in one of the kind of UK stocks, okay, that has an impact from the budget last week, okay, and in many ways a positive return. So this is CMC Markets, a brokerage, okay, provide CFDs, spread betting, okay, options, etc. And as you can see, they've probably, for the most part, the last few years, they have basically nudged their way between about £2 and £3. And what we saw here was basically a kind of a drift over the summer months lower back towards those kind of support with a really nice double bottom there. That a lot of that was to do with the rumours, the kind of kite flying that went on by the Chancellor about turning her attention to increasing taxes on gambling. And of course, many people would have thought that spread betting, which is historically being tax-free in the UK, Miss Reeves and her superior, Mr. Bell, might have basically wanted to use that to put their hands in the pockets of the brokers and basically change that long-standing under agreement. And when it came out that basically spread betting survives and can maintain, that is why we have seen this kind of this bump from the sort of £2 to £3 mark. Okay. Of course, then your curiosity is, well, okay, does it have the power to sort of go higher? My view would be probably not. To me, that looks like a really messy double top that ended with a nice engulfing candle key reversal. As I said, £3 has been pretty solid resistance for the last few years. I've now been more looking at and stuff to see whether my lower probability move would be it gets above it, turns it into a base and moves up towards that kind of 340 level. Or do we get sort of, more kind of, what's the right word? Volatility, political volatility in the UK. And that, if Miss Rees is replaced by Mr. Belland, sorry, my apologies, that's unprofessional of me. Then do we see spread betting, okay, come back on the radar? In which case we sort of drift our way back to £2. So CMC and its others, big competitor IG, had a similar price action. As I said, you might want to watch that, and that gives you a bit of an indication of the direction of travel of the let's say the kind of tax base, or the sort of the fingers of the government in terms of where they want to put them to basically increase the tax take. All right, there we go, ladies and gentlemen. So I said some charts of interest there we can look at, take away. Let us move across to the live markets now and have a look at what's going on there. So if you just bear with me for a second, let's just move across to the live charts. Okay, so we still have the we've got the what I've got here is a case of the markets up here. Okay, this is my indices spreadsheet. So what we have here, just bear with me 1 second, is let's go up the old drawing tool here. What I've got here is I've got the Dow on the monthly, NASDAQ on the monthly, S&P 500 on the monthly, Russell on the monthly there. Why am I on the monthly? Well, it's the start of the month. But also, I'm just looking at the price action there. Okay, that monthly candle, to me, I would be calling that, a bit of a doji there. Some people be saying, well, that, Paul, is kind of on the NASDAQ. That's kind of like a momentum pin bar. Okay, we've pushed lower, but we actually closed higher than we were. Some people might say the same on the SP 500 and also for the Russell. However, others might say, well, actually, Paul, certainly in terms of the NASDAQ and the SP 500 and the Russell, that could mostly be a hanging man, which is actually a bearish signal at the end of an uptrend. When you get a kind of a pin bar like that, sort of, a long down tail, small body at the top, okay, that is more like what they would call a hanging man, which is bearish, okay. My view, looking at that and looking at that, is that it would not surprise me if we drifted a little bit lower towards the end of the year. Now, the thing that people will be hoping for is not only will there be kind of an interest rate cut by the Fed, which I suspect most people have priced in anyway, but also they come out sort of talking about either increases in tax cuts for next year, increases for interest rate cuts, or in terms of either they will be deeper or faster, or maybe both, okay, depending upon the state of the economy. But that's what we're looking at there, okay, with that at the start of this month. My view at the moment would be we kind of drift a bit lower. That doesn't mean we kind of roll over, we just maybe drift a little bit lower. There'll be I think a lot of people who have done very well out of that kind of the move higher from the sort of Trump tantrums, tariffs earlier in the year, and might be just saying now, well, do you know what? I think maybe we're getting towards the end of the year. I'm going to lock in a little bit of profit and then clear off to Colorado to go skiing or wherever you choose to go skiing these days. So that would be my kind of view on that. A bit closer to home, DAX. What we see DAX is, and we've talked about this, DAX has been in that block there. And we've just looked at Rheinmetall, and how they've drifted off, and that's probably contributed to that kind of lower move into DAX as well. But once again, I think we're getting to an area here, okay, where we've got this kind of the sort of level of support, the weekly 50, which has acted as has acted as fabulous dynamic support there, hasn't it, over the last couple of years. Do we drift lower to that? Does the 20? Are we getting towards basically a bit of a squeeze building, a bit of a coil building up there? In which case, is that likely to sort of take us lower? So, it is on my watch list to watch to see how that particularly plays out. My bias would be bearish at this moment, okay, but price leads the way. All right, that would be my bias at the moment. So I just watch that and see how it plays out when it's at what I think is a bit of an inflection point. Bit closer to home, FTSE. So, of course, if I look at the monthly chart there, the monthly candle for the FTSE is, that's bit of indecision, I'd say there. I'd call that a bit of a high wave candle, small body, big wicks to both the north and the south. Bit of indecision, bit of a high wave candle. If we go down to the weekly chart, people will say, well, actually, Paul, we did actually have a little bit of a bullish move last week, and I'd grant you that. Okay, I'd grant you that. It's literally a case of a bit of Stockholm syndrome, I'd say, a bit of a market's version of Stockholm syndrome, namely, you know, um, the beatings will continue until morale improves. So, the budget could have been much worse. It was worse, but could have been much worse, and maybe there's a reflection of that. But there is also actually being serious for a moment. There's a reflection that Sterling got a little bit of a hit there last week, okay, and of course that normally bodes well for the FTSE. So, we are. I would call that pivoting around that daily 20. Okay, the daily 20 is nudging down. The daily 50 period moving average, which once again has acted as good support, is moving up. Are we going to get into a little bit of a coil here? Could there be, for the sort of look at me, well, is there a chance that this becomes a bit of a head and shoulders pattern? I think we just get into this I think we get into a bit of a drift, and maybe nothing really happens until you get the MPC meeting and the Federal Reserve meeting, okay, and we drift until then. We looked at just quick look at some of those other commodities. Listen, we looked at silver, didn't we? That is just continuing. If we look at the kind of daily chart on it, even today, bit of a gap up there on it. Okay, the move. It's kind of it hasn't really followed through yet, but remember we're waiting for the kind of the US markets to open. Let's see how they particularly play out. But that kind of joy in silver has also followed through into gold. This is gold on the weekly chart. Once again, as I said, I was looking, was this kind of a bit of a 1, 2, 3 double top holding above 4,000? But we can see that the sort of the moves there have actually pushed us there a little bit higher. Okay, a little bit. Gold has been the uncertainty trade. Okay, and there has been a good bit of that. And hence why we've seen that continue to sort of push its way higher there. As I said, Bitcoin, okay, was holding on the 200 period moving average, the weekly, all right. And people are looking, well, it got itself back up above 90,000. But if I go down to the daily chart, we can see, bump. That's how we've kind of opened today. And, can I go to the hourly charts? Yeah. We can see how that has happened there. Okay. That has just basically collapsed its way there. Okay. Now, is that an issue, as I said earlier, with some of the kind of contracts on CME? Is it indicative of something wider? It's a bit too early for me to say. I'm sure there'll be people smarter than me who can give you an indication, but all that to me is just continue that is still a downtrend for Bitcoin. All right, that's the way I'll be looking for it as a technical driven trader. So, as I said, the sum of the Bitcoin had moved higher last week. A lot of that had been due to the weakness in the US dollar. So let's have a look at that. I appreciate we're going to overrun a little bit today, ladies and gentlemen, but there's lots to cover. We'll have a look at dollar, we'll have a look at Japanese yen, and then we'll have a look at sterling. So this is my dollar profile here. Aussie on the daily, Kiwi on the daily, Euro on the daily, Pound on the daily, Swiss on the daily, dollar CAD, dollar yen. I said we'll look at yen and sterling anyway, okay, in a moment. And then, of course, I've got the Dixie here. And the dollar index here on the monthly candle is a bit of an indecision candle there, isn't it? A bit like what we just saw on the indices. Curious, right? Curious. If I go down to the weekly chart, we'd had a couple of months of a nice push up, and I think I talked about the other week, we had closed by the skin of our teeth above the big round number of 100. But you can see last week we kind of drifted back off it and have continued down so far. If we go down to the daily chart, the daily chart was really nice. It was kind of almost like a very orderly move back up to 100. It's just grinding its way higher, putting in higher lows, coiling up above the averages, pushing its way up, flagging, nice bull flag there, okay, off 200 and 100. Pushed us, so as I said, we got above 100, but there was there's nothing really concrete there, was there? Nothing terribly exciting there, okay. And as you can see, okay, as the clamour for the Fed to cut rates and for those rates to continue in terms of either speed and depth, that is what we have seen. Okay, we've drifted away, and you can see the start of today. has not only has Bitcoin dropped, but you can see dollar has just literally been dropping. This the hourly chart, okay, just dropping all the way down there, okay, from the start of the day. Is this is this going to be is this not going to be so much a Santa rally, more just a Santa's sleigh getting shot down? But anyway, we can see, as I said, if we look at that, euro is strengthened against the dollar, Aussie is strengthened against the dollar, Kiwi is strengthened against the dollar, Canadian dollar strengthening against the dollar, pound and sterling have, but also even kind of against the Swiss franc, and the Swiss franc has been weakening considerably. So there is that kind of dollar weakness there. All right, there is that dollar weakness there. It's come back off the 100, and you look at that. Actually, how does that impact A, the majors, and B, other knock-on currencies and markets? And that, as I said, I'm going to be talking about that for active trades in about an hour's time. If you want to join us for that, or watch the recording of it. So whilst dollar has been doing that, let us have a look at the Japanese yen. Now, those of you who've joined us regularly will know Japanese yen has been at the bottom of the STAM for months, for most of the year, really, and that has created some fabulous trends, some fabulous trades, and you can see it there, okay? Dollar strengthening against the yen, CAD strengthening against the yen, Aussie strengthening against the yen, euro, sterling, Kiwi, Swiss franc, okay? But what we can start to see is that has kind of the kind of mood has changed there a little bit. Now, euro against yen, remember, euro is still strong. It's kind of coiling up there. Aussie has been at the top of the stand, so today has dropped, but it's not as basically as clear as what we have seen in terms of Swiss franc. Okay, Swiss franc against the yen. Certainly sterling against the yen. Kiwi having popped has basically started to reverse there. CAD, okay, which has been a bit of strength. That is a bit of a double top there as well. Okay, so Mr. Ueda's comments that they're looking at basically the likelihood of raising interest rates. That is going to effectively, I think, will signal the end of yen weakness. Okay, at the moment that's what we're seeing, and so this might be as I said, an interesting currency to watch over the next couple of weeks, okay? Because I think whilst if we start to see sterling and the US basically cutting rates whilst yen is raising them, I think we'll see a shift in terms of just trades and carry trades as well. So let's finish with sterling, okay? So this is my sterling profile here. What have we got? Cable, pound yen, euro sterling, pound Swiss, pound Aussie, pound Kiwi, pound Canadian, and the FTSE all on the daily. So cable, I was talking about how we were kind of coiling up in front of A, Thanksgiving, and B, the budget. Sterling has pumped its way up there, but Thursday, Friday weren't great. But today we've pushed up there on sterling. Okay, that is not due to that dollar weakness we've seen more so than any kind of love of sterling. We can see there on the 30-minute chart. Okay, it spent most of the European session in its range, coiling up, and then has popped its way up there. Pound against yen, we've already looked. Okay, there, there's that big sell-off coming off there, and that that's what we saw. This is on the 30-minute chart from today. We kind of popped down. Okay, Pac-Man a little bit, but you can see that is that yen strength, sterling weakness coming on there. The kind of pound against the Aussie, well, not unsurprisingly, okay, we've seen Aussie strengthening against sterling, pound against New Zealand dollar. We've seen that strengthen against the pound Canadian dollar. Had for the most part done the same. Euro against sterling has kind of been, well, actually, let's do pound Swiss first. Pound Swiss, we had seen, as I said, strength there for the latter half of November, but that was a lot to do, as I was saying, Swiss franc weakness. But now we're kind of sort of just pulling back into a little bit of a coil there. That's the way I would look at that at this particular moment. 4-hour chart, we had a really nice run there, and then the kind of that is a case of who do you trust most at the moment, sterling or Swiss franc? And that's what I think we're seeing, that kind of, even though the Swiss franc is weak, we're seeing sterling drift lower against it. Same with the euro, namely we had drifted a little bit lower, but actually we're starting to see some of that euro strength there. This is last week, okay, just literally euro against sterling on the 4-hour chart, just basically sat there, and this was all of the kind of shenanigans going on over the last couple of weeks in the run up to the budget. And what we've seen is basically a bit of euro strength there. For me, it has to get above that 4-hour 50, which has acted as strong resistance for that kind of euro strength to maintain and to take us up to that kind of 88 level there on euro sterling. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let us draw it to a close there. I appreciate that, I'm flying through as much as I can. And as I said, I'm always trying to share as much as I possibly can. I hope you found that useful. I hope that's given you a bit of help and a bit of insight that you can utilize in your own trading. It's going to be an eventful and interesting week. So as always, make sure you're on top of the news flow, on top of the order flow, and on top of your risk management. Have a fabulous trading week, and I will speak to you soon. Many thanks.